Right guys, this is going to be my review for the reboot of Tomb Raider, so I hope you enjoy it. Leave your thoughts at the end of the video and thank you for watching. The story involves an expedition to the Dragon's Triangle to search for a mythical Japanese island called Yamatai. As the game begins, the crew are shipwrecked and Lara finds herself in amongst the animals and the island's strangely well-equipped cultists. To be honest, it's a very typical Tomb Raider plot, but that's not the real focus here. The main focus of the plot is the growth of Lara Croft and how she becomes the adventurer that we all know and love from the old games. So the main plot of this story in particular isn't the main focus. You should be looking kind of further ahead into how Lara's developing her skills as a survivor. But that being said, I did thoroughly enjoy the storyline and I was deeply engrossed into it. As the story progresses, it gets much darker and it gets very intriguing, and you just want to continue playing the game until you get to the very end because it is that engrossing. The biggest difference compared to the past Tomb Raider games is definitely the gameplay. It plays nothing like the original Tomb Raider games. It's got bits and pieces from the original games which doesn't take away from the series and make it a whole new franchise, but overall the game is much more suited to a current generation game. And that's the whole reason for the reboot. That's why we needed a reboot, because the past games couldn't be played really in modern day because there's nothing, it doesn't feel like anything that we're used to playing nowadays. It does feel very dated, and you can tell that it's suited for past consoles. Now this new game is very different, and it is rightly compared to Uncharted because of the style of game that it is. Everyone's been comparing them, and there's no doubt they are very similar. But that is not to say that one of them is a rip-off of the other, because obviously Uncharted probably wouldn't be around if we didn't have the original Tomb Raider games, and this Tomb Raider game possibly might not be the way it is today if we didn't have the Uncharted games. It does incorporate bits of Uncharted into the gameplay, and personally, for my opinion, I found it a much more enjoyable experience than Uncharted. Now the reason I say that is probably because Uncharted has 3 games, and each game does play similar to each other, and whereas this one is a complete reboot of the franchise and a new game, it does play differently and incorporate its own styles and just adds to the Uncharted formula. What you'd expect with a Tomb Raider game is exploration, puzzles and light combat, and this one is a bit different. There's a lot more heavy gun combat and enemies to take out and waves of henchmen and soldiers, which we haven't seen in past Tomb Raider games before. In the past Tomb Raider games, the gun combat has been a second hand to the puzzle gameplay, and most of the enemies were kind of wildlife and dinosaurs and stuff like that. Whereas this one takes a much more typical route where the enemies are kind of henchmen, gun-toting henchmen, and there are a lot more of them, and there is a lot more gun combat in this game. It is still a Tomb Raider game, and there is still puzzles to solve and a lot of exploration and collectibles to collect, and that's what's really great. I really do enjoy kind of going away from the path and just taking my time with the game, looking for collectibles, exploring these tombs, and just taking my time with it really, because it is a linear game. There is a one route that you have to follow. It's not open world, but the island that you are on is very expansive. It's not completely linear where there's nowhere else you can go apart from one path. You can stray away and take your time, like I said. There are a lot of collectibles that are going to keep you busy for hours on end once the game has been completed, because the island is very big. Once you have completed the game, you can fully explore the whole island and do whatever you want there and go anywhere freely without any limitations. Gun combat feels great, and if you've played any modern day third person shooters, you're going to be right in your flow. You'll know what you're doing instantly. One thing that a lot of games tend to get wrong is a covering system, and I think that this new Tomb Raider has the perfect covering system. You don't need to press a certain button to get into cover. You literally, all you have to do is walk to a ledge or a wall, and Lara will instantly duck down behind that wall, so it won't break up the play, and you can instantly walk away or run away from that wall without pressing any buttons or anything, so it's perfectly free flowing and keeping you in the action. It feels much more like a survival horror game, whereas the fact it's very dark, it's very atmospheric, there's a lot of kind of noises and animals walking around, everything like that, such as wolves, which do jump out at you, especially when you're walking through caves and everything like that with just a torchlight. It does feel very atmospheric, and it does intrigue me to play more and get me really hooked into the game, which is a great new feature of this whole new Tomb Raider series. And that's one of my favourite elements of it, is the whole setting and the whole eerie island. The visuals in this game are some of the best that I've seen in the current generation of gaming. It's beautiful, the whole island is gorgeous to look at. I sometimes find myself just standing still and looking out into the distance at the vast land of this island. There's different environments you can get on the island, such as the sunny beaches, down to the dark woods, into the depths of the gloomy dark caves only lit by your torchlight, which is very atmospheric, and it really sucks you into the game. The character models are very good as well. Lara's never looked this good in a game before. Her hair flows with the wind perfectly. Her facial movements follow little details on the track, such as collectibles and enemies and ammo on the floor, so it does actually help you to find things if you hadn't noticed it yourself. If you notice Lara looking at something on the floor, chances are there's going to be something there. Lara reacts to everything in the world. If you walk past a wall or a rock, she'll put her hand on it to just brush past. The way she reacts to everything is great, such as climbing and using your pickaxe to climb walls and everything. Everything flows perfectly in the game, and there's no glitches or bugs to break up that gameplay and take you out of the moment. It really does hook you in, and you really do believe that you're following Lara Croft on this adventure. One thing I didn't expect to see in a Tomb Raider game was online multiplayer, and when it was announced I did feel very skeptical about it and didn't think it was going to be able to work. And in my opinion, after dabbling around with it and having a few games online, I do not think it works at all. I think it was a bad decision to put multiplayer in the game, and it was clearly done at the last minute and chucked in just as an extra, just to try and compete with the other games that are around nowadays. Because as you know, online multiplayer is such a main feature of current generation gaming that maybe Crystal Dynamics felt that they needed to add that into the game to improve the life and keep this game going after a few months that it had been released. But I do think it hasn't paid off at all, because it does feel very cheap. It feels very much last generation because of the way the character models run, down to the gun combat and everything like that. It just doesn't work. They've tried to obviously to go for an Uncharted 3 style multiplayer because that's what it's most similar to, but it really doesn't feel very good. It feels like it was just done in literally about a month. They needed to work on it for a lot longer for this to work. I mean, it has potential. There's bits on there which are quite clever, such as the way you can set traps for enemies and get them tied up into a tree or something like that. There are some exciting elements, but literally they just do not work, and it does feel very dated and very old, and I really don't recommend trying out the multiplayer. Overall, this is a big breath of fresh air for current generation gaming. It's got a bit of everything in there that we all love. Great action, great gameplay, great visuals. The only downside was the poor multiplayer that I definitely recommend you stay away from. But buy this game purely for the single player, you will not be disappointed at all. And for that reason, I'm going to give this game a 9.5 out of 10. And it literally would be a 10 out of 10 if it wasn't for that multiplayer. So this game is brilliant, awesome game, and definitely up there for the Game of the Year contender.